In 30 years of judging talent, Simon Cowell had never turned off his microphone and stood up. Not for standing ovations, not for golden buzzers, not even for the most emotional performances that left audiences in tears. But that night in 2023, something changed. A homeless woman walked onto the America's Got Talent stage, and what she said next would break every rule Simon had ever lived by. The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed, and Simon sat in his usual position. Arms crossed, expression unreadable, ready to deliver his trademark brutal honesty. But within 3 minutes, he would be standing, speechless, with tears in his eyes, as 3,000 people in the theater and millions watching at home witnessed the most human moment in AGT history. This is the story of the night Simon Cowell's heart cracked open on live television. And it all started with 7 words that no one saw coming. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead. The woman's name was Margaret Torres, 54 years old, living on the streets of Los Angeles for the past 3 years. She had never auditioned for anything in her life, never stood on a stage, never owned a microphone. But something had driven her to those audition lines that stretched around the block, something more powerful than fear or shame, or the voice in her head that told her she didn't belong there. She stood backstage, clutching a worn piece of paper in her trembling hands. The other contestants around her were younger, polished, dressed in costumes that cost more than she had seen in months. Dance crews in matching outfits, singers with professional makeup, magicians with elaborate props. And then there was Margaret, in her only clean clothes, a faded blue sweater and jeans that had seen better days, her gray-streaked hair pulled back simply, no makeup, no glitter, no fanfare. The production assistant called her name. "Margaret Torres, you're up next." Her heart hammered against her chest as she walked through the wings. The stage lights were blinding after months of living in darkness. The audience was a sea of faces she couldn't quite make out, but she could feel their energy, their expectation, their judgment. At the judges' table sat 4 figures who had become larger than life on television: Howie Mandel, Heidi Klum, Sofia Vergara, and Simon Cowell. Simon barely looked up as she took her position center stage. He'd seen thousands of auditions, and he could usually predict how they would go within the first 10 seconds. Homeless woman, nervous energy, probably going to sing an emotional ballad about overcoming hardship. He'd heard it all before. "What's your name?" asked Terry Crews, the host, his smile warm and encouraging. "Margaret Torres," she said, her voice barely carrying across the theater despite the microphone. "And what are you going to do for us today, Margaret?" Margaret stopped. She looked down at the piece of paper in her hands, then up at the judges, then out at the audience. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the theater, not in the lighting, not in the production, but in Margaret herself. "I'm not here to sing," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not here to dance or do magic tricks or tell jokes. I'm here to tell you about my son." Simon's pen stopped moving across his notepad. The audience fell silent. Even Terry Crews, who had handled thousands of emotional moments, sensed that something different was happening. Margaret unfolded the piece of paper. "His name was David. He was 8 years old when he died in a car accident 2 years ago. I was driving." The silence in the theater became complete. No coughing, no shifting in seats, no background music. Just a woman standing under hot lights, holding a piece of paper, and 3,000 people holding their breath. "After David died, I couldn't live in the house anymore. Everything reminded me of him. His bedroom, his toys, his laugh echoing in the hallway. I lost my job because I couldn't stop crying. Lost my house 6 months later. Been living on the streets ever since, and honestly, most days I didn't want to wake up." Simon's arms, which had been crossed defensively across his chest, slowly lowered to his sides. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't an act hoping for sympathy votes. This was something else entirely. "But 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in a shelter, and there was a TV on in the corner. AGT was playing, and I watched a little girl singing about dreams and hope and never giving up. And for the first time in 2 years, I remembered something my son used to say to me every night before bed." Margaret looked down at the paper, then folded it back up. She didn't need it anymore. "He used to say, 'Mama, tomorrow is going to be beautiful.' Every single night. Even when he was scared of thunderstorms, even when he was sick, even the night before the accident. 'Mama, tomorrow is going to be beautiful.'" The first tear rolled down Heidi Klum's cheek. Sofia Vergara covered her mouth with her hand. Howie Mandel leaned forward, completely still. And Simon Cowell, for the first time in 30 years of television, turned off his microphone. "I came here tonight not to win money or become famous. I came here to tell everyone watching at home who's given up, who's lost someone, who's sleeping on concrete tonight thinking tomorrow will be just as dark as today. I came here to tell you what my 8-year-old boy taught me." Margaret walked closer to the edge of the stage, closer to the judges, closer to the cameras. "Tomorrow is going to be beautiful. Not because life promises us easy days, not because pain stops hurting, but because we get to choose. We get to choose hope. We get to choose to believe that something good is waiting for us, even when we can't see it yet." That's when Simon stood up. He didn't plan it. He didn't think about cameras or producers or the millions of people watching. He just stood up, and his chair rolled backward, and the microphone he had turned off fell to the table with a small thud that seemed to echo across the entire theater. "David was right," Margaret continued, her voice now strong and clear, carrying to every corner of the auditorium. "Tomorrow is going to be beautiful. Not because I'm standing on this stage, but because I chose to stand on this stage. I chose to get up. I chose to try. I chose to remember that my son's voice is stronger than my pain." Simon walked around the judges' table. The cameras followed him, but he wasn't performing for them. He was walking toward Margaret, and with each step, 30 years of cynicism and careful emotional distance crumbled away. The audience began to understand what was happening. Some stood up. Then more. Then entire sections rose to their feet, not applauding yet, but standing in witness to something they had never seen before. Simon stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at Margaret. "What was his favorite color?" he asked, his voice barely audible without a microphone. "Blue," Margaret said, smiling through tears. "Like the sky on a perfect day." Simon nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a blue pocket square, something he wore occasionally but had never thought much about. He held it up toward her. "This is for David," he said. "And this is for every tomorrow that's going to be beautiful because you chose hope." The theater erupted. But it wasn't the usual AGT explosion of cheers and applause. It was something deeper, something primal. People were crying and clapping and standing, but underneath it all was a recognition that they had witnessed something sacred. Sofia Vergara was sobbing openly. Heidi had both hands over her heart. Howie Mandel, who rarely showed deep emotion, was wiping tears from his eyes. And Simon Cowell stood at the foot of the stage, holding a blue pocket square, completely transformed. "Margaret," Terry Crews said, his own voice thick with emotion. "You said you didn't come here to sing or dance or perform. But you just gave us the most powerful performance in AGT history. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten." Margaret took the microphone Terry offered her. "I have one more thing to say," she announced. The audience quieted immediately. "To everyone watching at home tonight who's lost hope, you are not alone. To everyone who thinks their story is over, it's not. To everyone who's forgotten how to dream, close your eyes and remember being 8 years old, when tomorrow felt like an adventure instead of a burden." She looked directly into the main camera, and millions of people felt like she was speaking directly to them. "David taught me that beautiful doesn't mean perfect. Beautiful means brave. Beautiful means trying. Beautiful means believing that love is stronger than loss, and hope is stronger than hurt. Tomorrow is going to be beautiful because we're going to make it beautiful." Simon reached up and handed Margaret the blue pocket square. She took it, held it close to her heart, and for a moment, mother and son were together again in that simple blue fabric. The judges didn't vote that night. There was no need for buzzers, red X's, or competitions. Margaret had already won something bigger than any talent show could offer. She had reminded an entire theater, an entire television audience, an entire world, that the most powerful performance is simply choosing to hope. As Margaret walked off stage, she carried with her not just a blue pocket square, but the knowledge that David's voice had traveled farther than she had ever imagined. Through her courage, his wisdom would reach millions of homes, millions of hearts, millions of people who needed to hear that tomorrow could be beautiful. Simon returned to his seat, but something had fundamentally changed. The judge who had built a career on finding flaws had just witnessed perfection in its purest form, not in talent or skill, but in the choice to hope when hope seems impossible. The cameras stopped rolling, but the impact continued. Within hours, "Tomorrow is going to be beautiful," became more than a phrase, it became a movement. People shared their own stories of loss and hope, of choosing to believe in beautiful tomorrows despite dark todays. And somewhere, in the love between a mother and son, in the courage of a woman who chose hope over despair, in the moment a cynical judge remembered his own humanity, the world became a little more beautiful. Because sometimes, the greatest talent isn't what you can do with your voice or your hands or your feet. Sometimes, the greatest talent is what you can do with a broken heart that chooses to keep beating, keep hoping, keep believing in beautiful tomorrows. 3 months later, Simon Cowell would receive a letter. It was handwritten on simple notebook paper, mailed from a small apartment in downtown Los Angeles. The return address read, Torres. Dear Simon, it began. I wanted you to know that I got the job. It's nothing fancy, just cleaning offices at night, but it's honest work, and it pays enough for a small apartment. I sleep in a real bed now, and every morning I wake up and say out loud, tomorrow is going to be beautiful. The letter continued. But more importantly, I wanted to tell you about the letters I've been getting. Hundreds of them, from people all over the world who saw that night on AGT. A man in Ohio who lost his wife to cancer wrote that he hadn't left his house in 6 months until he heard David's words. A teenage girl in Texas who was ready to give up on life said she decided to try one more day, then another, then another. A veteran in Florida who'd been homeless for 2 years said he finally called his sister. Simon read the letter in his office, the same blue pocket square now framed on his wall next to his awards and achievements. They're not writing to me because I'm special, Margaret's letter continued. They're writing because David was right, and sometimes we just need someone to remind us. Every single person who finds hope again is David's voice echoing in the world. Every tomorrow that someone chooses to believe in is his gift living on. The letter ended simply. Thank you for standing up that night. Thank you for seeing me not as a homeless woman or a broken mother, but as someone carrying a message that needed to be heard. P.S. I kept the blue pocket square. It sits on my kitchen table every morning when I drink my coffee and plan my beautiful tomorrow. Simon folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer next to dozens of others that had arrived since that night. Production companies wanted to interview Margaret, book publishers wanted her story, motivational speaking circuits wanted to hire her. But Margaret had politely declined them all. David's message doesn't need to make money, she had told Simon's assistant when the offers poured in. It just needs to reach the people who need to hear it. And it's doing that just fine on its own. 6 months after that night, America's Got Talent dedicated an entire episode to Messages of Hope, featuring people from around the world who had been inspired by Margaret's words. But Margaret herself didn't appear on the show. Instead, Simon read a final message from her. Tomorrow is going to be beautiful not because we're on television or because we're famous or because we win competitions. Tomorrow is going to be beautiful because we choose love over loss, hope over fear, and each other over isolation. That's David's real talent. He knew that beauty isn't something you find, it's something you create, one tomorrow at a time. The show ended not with fireworks or confetti, but with a single spotlight on an empty stage and David's words displayed on the screen. Tomorrow is going to be beautiful. The silence that followed was the most powerful moment in television history. Not because of what was said, but because of what was felt by millions of people choosing hope. Margaret Torres never won a talent competition that night. But she won something infinitely more valuable. She won back her belief that David was right. Tomorrow is going to be beautiful.